Being born without a sky is like opening your eyes inside a dream that's already falling apart, and knowing instinctively that you'll never wake up. I grew up with the idea that blue exists, but I only know it from the artificial glow of old light bulbs and stories whispered between rationing shifts. This letter is for someone who will never know me. Maybe for you, who still breathe up there, or for the stones that endure in silence where cities once stood. It's hard to write when everything around me seems to have forgotten that time passes. But today, September 1st, 2029, I write as someone who throws a bottle into an invisible sea, not to be found, but so it won't vanish alone. My name is Riley Chen. I'm 19 years old, and I've never seen the sun. I was born 3 months after the collapse, in an underground chamber that used to be part of an abandoned subway station. While other children grew up with sky and wind, I grew up with the constant hum of generators and the metallic smell of damp walls. My toys were rusted tools. My bedtime stories were accounts of the surface, that mythical place where trees danced with the wind and rain touched your face like a kiss. Sometimes I catch myself wondering what kind of memory this is that I carry, one that isn't mine, yet lives in me like an inherited longing. Down here, everything is a limit: space, light, water, hope. And yet, we grow, like roots searching for a crack toward the impossible. They say it all began with fear of the other, of the future, of one's own reflection. The great powers were always on the brink of war, not the kind with bombs falling from the sky, but a quieter, more cowardly kind. Scientists in sealed labs began developing weapons that made no sound. Viruses, bacteria, organisms engineered to strike with surgical precision. The promise was absurd and yet irresistible. Eliminate only the enemies, leave our own untouched. It was a clean war, they said, a smart war, but they forgot that life doesn't follow orders. My parents used to say the tension between geopolitical blocs grew like a fever with no cure. Nations armed themselves with genetic codes and invisible threats. They called it biological deterrence, as if pretty words could hide the monstrosity. And when the first biological agent was released, by mistake, by desperation, by pride, no one knows, the world held its breath, and then collapsed. What was meant to be a targeted weapon escaped. It mutated, adapted, spread from body to body like a secret no one could get rid of. There were no explosions, only the silence of empty streets, of screens that stopped responding, of planes that no longer took off. A war with no tanks, but with overflowing hospitals. And the worst part is that it didn't come from outside in. It came from inside out. We built the end of the world with our own hands, in the name of a security that never existed. And now, here I am, daughter of a mistake that began long before me, trying to understand why someone thought fear was worth more than the sky. The bacteria didn't arrive like a storm, but like a whisper. Invisible, it slipped in through airports, train windows, and air conditioning systems that kept running as if the world were still whole. It was in the water people drank without thinking, on the handrails touched by thousands of hands, in the masks that no longer made any difference. At first, it seemed like just another outbreak, another alarmist headline. But within hours, the bodies began to fall. First in Tokyo, then Paris. Within 3 days, New York was already a cemetery. By day 5, London had gone silent. The images, once flooding in by the millions through screens, began to fade. Videos of people collapsing in the streets, screaming for help that never came. Hospitals turned into makeshift morgues, doctors in despair, clueless about what they were facing. Entire families locked themselves inside their homes, waiting for it to pass. But it didn't. The infection gave no respite. All it took was a touch, a shared breath, and the body would begin to fail. It was too fast to understand, and too devastating to forget. They told me that in the final network broadcasts, people were begging for answers, for a cure, for some comforting lie. But what came was silence. The bacteria became omnipresent, a ghost that no longer needed to hide. It was as if the planet had been switched off, not with a bang, but with a sickly sigh. And those who were lucky fled, downward, into the earth, where air could still be filtered, even if hope was already contaminated. The bacteria was like a cruel thief. It first took what you held most essential, then left the body to rot from within. It all began with a mild heat, almost imperceptible, followed by a strange dizziness, as if the ground were shifting beneath your feet. Within hours, hands would tremble like those of an old man forgotten by time, and eyes would lose focus, as if the world were fading away, layer by layer. My parents said the most terrifying part was the moment the person realized they were still conscious, but could no longer control their own body. The degeneration was swift and relentless. The bacteria burned through the nervous system like fire on dry paper. Muscles failed, speech disappeared, and within minutes came the seizures. Then, the collapse of organs. The liver first, then the kidneys, then the heart. All of it in less than 24 hours. There was no time for goodbyes, no room for regrets. People died with their eyes open, trapped inside themselves, their minds alive just long enough to grasp the horror, until even that faded away. There was no cure, no medicine, no treatment, only isolation, only distance, only fear. The ones who survived did so because they ran before the fever reached them, because they locked the doors before a neighbor coughed, and the ones who didn't run were left to feed the silence. There were no funerals, no one to clean the bodies, no time for mourning. It was survive, or be buried by the wind that carried the last whispers of those who still remembered what it was like to live without fearing to breathe. The first response was silence, not because they didn't know what to do, but because no one wanted to admit they had lost control. Then came the repression. Governments declared martial law in dozens of countries, as if armed soldiers could contain a bacterium that already lived in the air. They bombed entire cities in a desperate attempt to stop its spread. Cities where people were still alive, screaming for help, waving from windows. The order was clear: sacrifice the few to try to save the many. But the many were already infected. They just didn't know it yet. Disinformation campaigns spread faster than the disease. They said everything was under control, that a vaccine was on the way, that it was just another flu. But the networks began to fall, one by one. First the government websites, then social media, satellites, the signals. It was as if the world were shutting down piece by piece, and we, locked beneath the earth, could hear the silence expanding through the concrete. The collapse didn't come with an explosion. It came with absence of answers, of leadership, of hope. When the communications stopped, we understood there was no one left up there to listen. The planet, once full of voices and noise, had become a mute place. Borders disappeared, countries ceased to exist. All that remained were small, isolated groups trying to stay alive, while civilization suffocated in its own ruins. Down here, underground, we were born from the wreckage, children of a time that tried to control the uncontrollable. The price was existence itself. And now, we are only echoes trying to remember that there once was a world before this end. Life underground isn't really life, not exactly. It's a kind of survival that has learned to stay quiet just to keep existing. The tunnels were turned into concrete cities without a sky, where time is measured by the hum of turbines, not by daylight. Here, every breath is counted, every drop of water divided, and light is a privilege. A single lamp lit for 30 minutes is reason enough to celebrate. Growing up in this world means learning not to ask too many questions, not to dream too big, not to wish for the impossible. If someone ever finds this letter, maybe among the ruins, maybe stored in some fragment of surviving digital memory, I want you to know we still exist. Even here, in the dark, between walls that whisper memories of a lost world, we still learn to laugh, to cry, to love. Even though we've never seen the sky, We've learned to miss it as if it were part of our own bodies. I write this not for myself, but for all of us who were born after the end, carrying on our shoulders the weight of a guilt that isn't ours, but one we inherited like a name. If the world ever breathes again, I want it to know we never forgot what it was like to love the sky, even if we've never seen it. Subscribe to the channel to experience the upcoming videos.